So I'm not seeing anybody in there yet in the live. And we just got somebody join. We're going to start up in a few minutes. I am also working on a little preview thing. So while I'm waiting to go live, I'll be right back. All right, all right. We got a few people joining in. Let's see. I've got one person's joined, so I'll start here in a few minutes. I'm actually going live on multiple platforms. This is a pilot, and I am testing out a few things, so I'm pushing the envelope a little bit. Hopefully, there won't be any issues. I did one yesterday as a dry run. This one is an actual live, and we'll see what's going on. So I'm also streaming to Facebook and not to LinkedIn, but Facebook and YouTube. I have specific channels that have to do with neuroplasticity. And I'm not really doing replays of these, but the idea is if it works out, I'll go live each week. I'm waiting for people to join. Meanwhile, I've got a little project I'm doing, so I ask you to La Unique Boutique. And by the way, if you have any comments, questions, you can put them in the chat. I'm looking at the chat right now, and I'll see that come up, and I'll answer them as I go. So periodically, I'll be able to look over there and just to see comments and questions. And then I don't think there's going to be time allowed, but if someone wants to come on stage, I can do that as well. So what is going on here? Okay. So now if let's see, is that going to play? Maybe I'll speed it up a little bit. I'm working on something here. Let's see how that works out. Oh, that's good. That'll work. Okay. So, so far, you're the only one who's joined La Unique Boutique. I don't want to keep you waiting, but I also would like to have a few more people on. So I have this setup that I'm working on to use while I'm waiting. So let me set that up and you'll see what it is. I've got some infographics. Hello there, Anthony, and welcome. I am this is a pilot, so I'm trying a few different things. I'm pushing the envelope and to break things, because when I go doing it for real, I want to know what can go wrong and how to recover. So I'm streaming to multiple platforms as well as TikTok. And so I'm using StreamYard and TikTok together because TikTok is a great studio. I can use one, but I prefer to have the TikTok capabilities. Now, let's first do this on TikTok, because I got people on TikTok. I'm going to add a window that I'm running. It's going to call that a window capture. Add, and let's see if I can. It's asking me to select a program, and it's going to be infographics. Now, if you look at my content, you know I talk a lot about neuroplasticity. And one of my objectives with these live events is to help people understand just what neuroplasticity is. I'm going to get into the 4 pillars of self-mastery 100%, but I'm going to talk a little bit about at source about neuroplasticity just as a warm up. And you'll see what I'm doing. So I've been collecting infographics, not really knowing what I was going to do with them. I've been doing this for almost a year. It'll be a year in August. I've been collecting infographics. Infographics started taking off on LinkedIn, and so I have several hundred. I have something maybe in the neighborhood of, I don't know, 800 infographics. And I don't read all of them. I look at the heading, and if it's something that makes sense, if it's related to dynamic leadership, then I will I will use it. So here's a set of infographics. What I did is I made a MP4, and I'm going to experiment with this because, as you know, when you go live, people come in at different times, and using the infographics, it's a way for me to have some conversation about things. Let me just add it to my other platform as well. So we need to add presenter, and we're going to do share screen. Like I said, I'm not in a position to do these. Can I not share another screen here? I'd have to stop the screen share. So let's do that. Let's stop that screen share and start a new screen share. And that one's going to be my infographics. Or not. There. All right. So what we're doing is this. I'm going to scroll through these. I did not look at them in advance. I just know that they have to do with emotional intelligence or leadership, and I'm trying this out. So if I just stop one, I'm just going to pause it and then look at it and tell you what's going on with respect to neuroplasticity, because the point is to help people understand that neuroplasticity is not what you think it is. It's not more mindset stuff. It's not positive thinking stuff. It's literally a breakthrough, and because of the brain imaging that's been available to us since about late 80s and 90s is when it started. We recognized that it's not a subconscious mind, but it's a brain. So you pause before reacting. Now, what I'm going to do with this is, do I have sound? Yeah. What I'm going to do with this is talk about neuroplasticity and dynamic leadership. Dynamic leadership is leadership with applied neuroplasticity. It picks up where emotional intelligence left off. So where emotional intelligence was about regulating after the fact, dynamic leadership is modulating, intercepting, modulating, and regulating inside the habit pattern, inside that automaticity, that first 600 milliseconds. So it says you pause before reacting. Now, most people have learned this. They've heard this. You have to pause. But the pause, if you consider what's going on with with the network of neurons, that first 600 milliseconds, you're often running with a trigger, and it's very difficult to pause because it's like a freight train. How do you pause that freight train? Meaning the subconscious, the conscious mind has a reaction time of about a half a second. That early half second, that first half second, the network of neurons, the subconscious is busy working, trying to figure out what this means and have some meaning to it, applies cognitive biases and all that. And then it hands it off to the conscious mind, and now you're triggered. So how do you pause when you're triggered? That's what we do with the first 600 milliseconds, the 1 second model, which I'll cover during the 4 pillars of self-mastery. You make people feel heard. I'm also doing a series on listening. There's actually proof that the speaker's brain changes. It lights up differently when there's good listening. Hold on a second. Had to turn on the AC. Uh, it actually, people's brains actually light up differently when you're listening to them. So listening is powerful. There's a, back in 1980s, I went, this is when we had bookstores. That's all there was. You go to bookstore to find your books because there was no Google. And I remember wanting to get a book on listening, and there were shelves and shelves and shelves in the communication section, which is what you did. You went to the self improvement, the communication, the leadership section, or wherever, and you look for the book, the titles. And sometimes you could say, well, this one has like 8 books there, so that's a good sign because that means the bookstore is selling them and they have a larger inventory, just stuff like that. And going to leadership and communication, I found one book on listening out of close to 1,000 books on communicating. All the books were about how to speak so people listen, talk so people hear you, all this how talk, and very little on listening. Now, and so that was less than 0.1% in that particular bookstore. And it's in Washington, D.C., an area known for high education level. And there, it was near the Capitol, late 80s. Now it's about 1 out of 7. So if you went to go, now you can do it with electronics, but I had AI look at what's the percentage of books on listening relative to speaking in the communication area. And it's roughly 1 in 7. So it's a little bit, but that's dealing with topics. If you look at pure books, it's still in single digits. It's like 6 or 7%. Point being, listening is very important, and we've got to do a better job of that. I'm not going to stay on this one because that's an easy one. It's all emotional intelligence. I'm going to run through this. Well, let's see. They stay composed under pressure, choosing calm over chaos. So I use neuroplasticity and dynamic leadership not to stay calm, not to suppress anxiety. I use neuroplasticity to condition in the right kind of interception, modulation, and regulation, all happening inside that first 600 milliseconds. So we build in the conditioning at the same automaticity level that people are experiencing life. This is well before the conscious mind. The conscious mind takes a half a second. Now, that may not seem long, but if you consider the subconscious, the network of neurons is processing at 11 million bits per second, and the conscious mind processes at only 50 bits per second. You can see what's going on. That half second, that's worth like over 100,000 times more information than can process in the subconscious in that same time. So we're able to intercept rather than take that trigger as is and then hand it off to the conscious mind with all this fear and threat that the network of neurons is biased to see. We are able to intercept it, modulate it, put it, check it so it doesn't pass that on, meaning we're going to have less reaction time, less reaction. We're going to have less reactivity, less triggering events. And that's just one little example. And I just took one off of this. So again, this is all just top of mind. I'm just scrolling down and I'm picking one. They listen to understand. I was already talking about that one. But listening to understand is a little bit more than listening to understand. You don't want to just understand the words. So you've heard of rephrasing, rephrase what they said. Yeah, but it's not a technique. That's a way to listen because you want to make sure you heard them. But there's another level of listening. And you listen for what they didn't say. You're listening for the emotion behind it. And so after you say, so if I hear you correctly, what you're saying is that you don't know why I'm talking about this stuff when the thing is four pillars of self-mastery. I can understand what you're saying about that. But now I'm going to listen to the meaning behind it. What's the emotion behind it? And maybe the emotion is I'm in a hurry, get to the point. And then I can reflect that back. So then I say, yeah, I can understand that you're interested in why this makes sense. I also recognize you're probably very busy. I'm intuiting, I'm inferring what I think I'm hearing from that person, and they'll correct me if I'm wrong. So you can say, wow, that must be frustrating. And you've seen people do this. That's really, that must have been frustrating. They're listening not just for the words, but they're listening for the emotion behind it. So I wanted to just do this as a way for me to warm up my voice, but I don't want to keep you folks who are already here waiting. We're going to switch back over to let's see. Perfect. We're going to switch back over to the presentation, and I've got 2 different platforms going. So I'm streaming to a few areas using StreamYard, and I also have the TikTok Studio because I really like the TikTok Studio. And StreamYard is great. I've had Restream, and I can argue for both of those, but it depends on what you are seeking to accomplish, and that's what should determine which one you use. So I can speak to both. I'm not going to pay for both because I will have also have Zoom, and I'm paying for it would just be too much. Now, what we're talking about today is the 4 pillars of self-mastery, self-mastery masterclass. This is a pilot because I will be doing a more formal version, and I'll be streaming it, and a lot of it will be on my LinkedIn audience, but it'll be in different areas. So self-mastery masterclass. This came about because neuroplasticity is a powerful breakthrough and people don't understand it. One is because it's still in the labs, it's still in the research labs. And because of that, it's getting people are making up what they think it is mindset, positive thinking. Everyone who knows the word neuroplasticity probably also knows that, yeah, the brain is malleable and it can change. But do you know how to change it? Let's see something. Do you know how to change it? Do you know how to apply allostatic neuroplasticity? And the difference between neuroplasticity and allostatic neuroplasticity is that allostatic neuroplasticity replaces habits, so you have an upward trajectory. If you work out, if you lift, you know that in exercise, mainly weightlifting, you have plateaus, and good trainers will do things on purpose to preempt that plateau. So rather than letting the plateau happen, they change up the routine about every 6 to 8 weeks or so to get in front of those plateaus, and you just keep rising. If you don't do that, you're going to plateau. Now, the plateau is actually a neurotransmitter issue. The brain is always trying to be more efficient, and what happens is it strengthens the signal in such a way, the neural pathway signal, because remember, your muscle doesn't move because of the muscle. Your arm, your hands don't move because of the muscle. They move because the nervous system activated the muscle. So there's 3 parts. Glutamate sends a signal to the neural pathway. The neural pathway sends a signal to the acetylcholine, which is a connection to the muscle junction. And when you add more neurotransmitter, you're now strengthening the signal. So your muscle can be the same strength, but if you have a weaker acetylcholine or weaker glutamate or weaker neural pathway, you're not going to be able to lift as much weight as if you had them strong. So what allostasis does is I don't want to say tricks the system, but it communicates to the system that this thing is important, and therefore it needs to generate more neurotransmitter. More neurotransmitter means more dopamine, which is not only a habit forming neurotransmitter, but it's signal amplifier. So it gives you a stronger signal. And then serotonin is the feel good one, which helps you with moving things. So my point is, it's very difficult for people to understand what neuroplasticity is because there's not a lot of information about it. And the information that is there tends to be more homeostatic. So homeostasis is stabilizing at the status quo. Allostasis is stabilizing on an upward trajectory. And because it's still in the labs, you'll see it come up in more like getting health back on track, like physical therapy. You'll see it. You'll see it in geriatric situations where they're trying to hold off things like Alzheimer's or maybe recover from some of that. But neuroplasticity is, in simple terms, is what's at play when athletes use deep practice to learn a new move. The breakthrough is not that. The breakthrough is that it's the same with cognitive processing. Virtually everyone has used the term muscle memory. It's not muscle memory, it's nervous system memory. There's no surprise there. The surprise is that the way you improve muscle memory, which is essentially a habit, what you're doing is creating a new path of least resistance so that movement happens the way you want it to happen. So that movement happens the way that you want it to happen. I don't know why there we go. I see what's going on. Anyway, the cognitive processing is the same way. You can strengthen the neurons with myelin, strengthen the neural pathways with synaptogenesis, and make that the path of least resistance with deep practice. The same thing you're doing with exercise, except they don't talk about it, or I should say deep practice with athletics, except they don't talk about it like we're working on neuroplasticity. They're just saying we're creating some muscle memory. So there you go. And now we're going to jump in and start looking at this. As I said, I'm looking at the comments. Feel free to drop some comments in there. I'll answer your questions as we go. And I do have a part where we're going to do some participation. So the 4 pillars of self-mastery: conquer anxiety, strengthen relationships, and create unshakable confidence. Hopefully that sounds far-fetched to you, but when you understand that all of that stuff lives in the first half second, then and if you understand that you can use neuroplasticity to change your habits at the automaticity level. So in other words, at the stimulus reaction, which is the first half second response. So most people think of stimulus response. Atomic Habits talks about it as the cue and the response, right? The stimulus is the cue. But there's a whole half second of activity going on before the conscious mind is aware. And these are the 4. So it's the fundamentals, which is what I've been talking about. So I can skip through that a little bit. I'll bake some of that into the future talks. And then I go to habit mastery, because we have to believe that we can change habits. Too many people believe that it is what we have, right? In fact, emotional intelligence, which was popularized around 1995, it was first coined 1990, but in terms of leadership, it was called it 1995. At that time, it was still believed that we can't change habits. This was before we had the brain imaging to realize that habits are actually paths of least resistance in the network of neurons, and that the subconscious is not a mind. Subconscious is just a compilation of all those associations. When you see it that way, it changes how you approach it. And so I first have to break the paradigm, or break that myth that we can't change habits, because we can. You actually replace them. You make a new habit the path of least resistance, and the old one goes away. It's called synaptogenesis. The synapses literally doesn't, I shouldn't say literally. It's like the synapses dries up for the dormant neural pathways and goes to the active ones. The active is more like pruning. So the brain is efficient. Synapses has a high metabolic load. So rather than generating excess neurotransmitter, this is why allostasis is what it is, the brain is always pruning unused neural pathways. So if you are involved in any kind of seasonal sport, skating, skiing, snowboarding, biking, anything like that, you'll notice basketball, you feel a little awkward the first day out for the season. It only takes 1 or 2 days for it to activate. When you go to a physical therapist and they talk about we have to activate the stabilizer muscles, I've always thought it was the muscles. So when I'm out skiing the first day, I always thought, oh, my stabilizer muscles have to build up. Now I realize it's not the muscles. They were already there. It's the neural pathways had to get synapses in them. That's why it only takes a day. You're not building a muscle in a day. By the 3rd day, my skiing is not that far off from where it was, or snowboarding from where it was the prior season, because the neural pathways got activated. Then we get into state mastery, because state mastery, most people's habit problems stem from an inability to manage their state. And the reason why managing your state is so hard is because stimulus hits and we react. And once you're reacting, it's late. And then the last one is performance hygiene. There's some things that we have to stop doing and some things that we have to start doing. And performance hygiene gets into that. So a lot of times if I'm starting with the client, the first thing I do is we set at the exit ramp. Because if there's resistance factors in there, I need to get rid of those resistance factors before I can build on the empowerment catalyst, because they won't be able to receive the empowerment catalysts if they've got too many resistance factors. Now, the 4 pillars of self-mastery, and some of this I may have already said, so we're just going to roll with it. Most people over 40 think they've tried everything, and that what they have is it. That's what I just shared with you. The answer to the question, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? I'd like you to think about that. Just if you want to put it in the chat, fine, it's great. I'll comment on it. But what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? This is a very important question. I first learned this question 40 years ago. And what's interesting is the answer doesn't really change. I've asked this question across hundreds of people, and the answer doesn't change throughout the lifetime. It tweaks, but it doesn't change, because it's what's in our heart. It's our real purpose. And the thing that's keeping us from doing what's in our heart is some form of fear. You can spin it different ways, but let's just call it fear. So if you knew you couldn't fail, you would be doing this thing. The reason you don't do this thing is because there's a fear of failure, which probably seems logical. Now, if the answer is I'm already doing it, and I'll tell you, I've only had one person who actually said, well, I'm already doing it. I would be doing exactly what I'm doing. And they had basically, they lost everything and they were starting over. And kind of like what happened with me with the motorcycle business, I lost everything, had to start over. And guess what? Now I'm doing that thing that I always said I would do if I knew I couldn't fail, but I was never willing to put myself on the line. Now, if your answer is not you're already doing it, then you have to ask then ask yourself, what is it that's keeping you? What does failure look like? What is it what is it that concerns you that could happen if you do this thing? Because you want to get underneath where the fear is coming from, and then we can unpack it. This gets to the point that most people don't think that they need anything that's available to them because they don't need any help with respect to development because they believe they've already tried everything. That's the point about that first bullet. If they think they've tried everything, it's not that they think they don't need anything, it's that they don't believe that there's anything that can help because they've tried everything and they still have the issue. Now, even if you're already doing it, then the next part of the question is it a watered down version of what you wish you could do? And this, again, it gets to purpose. My motorcycle business was all about passion. I went after passion. And once the pandemic hit, passion wasn't enough to crawl through what felt like crawling over broken glass at the time. So I let it close. And now what I realize is that passion is great. Yes, do what you love, but lead with purpose. Start with purpose and then figure out what your passions are within, say, 30 degrees either side of that purpose, and do the passion when things are great. But when it's tough, zero back in on your purpose. So if you think about a clock face, 12 o'clock is my direction. That's my purpose. From 11 to 1 is 60 degrees around that purpose. I have plenty of room for my passion to fit with that purpose. And you can just use a little imagination. Now, here's a similar question. If you knew that you could fund your desired lifestyle pursuing purpose and passion, what would you be doing? So these are good questions that I use with a client early on just to uncover what's really going on. I listen to the answers. I listen to what's really behind it. Remember earlier I was talking about listening, not just for the words, but listening also for the emotion and what's not being said. And it doesn't tell me an answer. What it tells me is I need to maybe dig into that point a little bit more. Now, here's this thing. It's the Yerkes-Dodson law. It's called the inverted U. It's around since 1910. And by the way, I talk about things that were available 100 years ago because in the context of our brain, a 300,000-year-old brain, roughly, right? You can argue it's 1 million, you could argue it's 100,000, but 300,000 is a safe number. Most of that has been evolution along the lines of hunter-gatherer. Now, if you take the 300,000 years and you look at what percentage of that has been something like our current life, it's 99% has been hunter-gatherer, less than 1%. That would be 3,000 years. Less than 1% looks anything like what we have today. Technology, machines, and you could argue the wheel was around and things like that, but you get my point. What's happened in the last 100 years has been totally exponential. And now AI has taken us even to another level. So the fact that this was around since 1910 does not make it old. It makes it useful because the brain hasn't changed. That's the other point. The brain really hasn't changed in the last few hundred years, and actually more like 300,000, because in fact, when you look at neuroscience, it makes it much easier to understand if you look at it through the lens of the hunter-gatherer. So here's the pressure curve, the inverted U, Yerkes-Dodson law. I call it the pressure curve, as do a lot of other people. The point is, when you're disengaged, you're not going to be operating at the best version of yourself. When you have too much, The challenge is too much pressure, overwhelm. You get the cognitive narrowing. This is when you see people go into the red mist. If you're looking at police officers stopping somebody, you can see both of those people go into this overwhelm mode. And what we want to do is manage our environment so we're in this optimal pressure range. Now, how do you do that? Well, you have to have agency over yourself, but more importantly, you have to have rapid recovery so that when things hit you from the outside, you're you're able to get back on track quickly. Recovery is more important than trying to be calm all the time. That's why I talk about the first half second. That first half second, anything can hit you. The point is we can't be ready for every single thing, but you can be ready for anything. You don't know what things are coming, but you know there are going to be things that are going to throw you off course. And we also know that those things are probably not tigers, which means we don't have to respond like it's a tiger. And then we have uh, if you get outside the optimal pressure, you have unpredictable results. Others' actions change your results, which is why I'm into recovery and reset very quickly. I'll get more into that in a few minutes. And then uncertainty causes a lack of confidence. So I'm coming back to this point about what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? There's reasons why people are afraid of failing because it's too easy to get hijacked by something outside of us, and we can't control what's outside of us. That's why I'm talking about this curve, and we use dynamic leadership so you can modulate, you can intercept, modulate, and regulate all inside the first 600 milliseconds so that you're optimizing your capabilities, the optimal pressure. Now, here's this should resonate with people. We have the this is your comfort zone. You're moving along. It's very difficult to break out of that comfort zone because above the comfort zone is it's like a barrier. So every breakthrough is preceded by some form of confusion because you have to let go of old beliefs. The things that are keeping you down are the stories, the habit patterns, bad experiences. It could be getting bullied, discrimination. It could be good experiences. You could have some experiences that are so good that you just don't ever want to do anything different. We see athletes who have superstitions like that. They have to wear the same socks each time. Those are all limitations. And if they don't wear the lucky socks, then they have a bad day and they blame it on the fact that they didn't have the lucky socks. The point is, when you try to cross this barrier, Joe Dispenza talks about something similar with crossing the river. You get this cognitive dissonance that happens. That cognitive dissonance occurs when you are activating neuroplasticity. Now, you could fall below this comfort zone, and then we have to get back on track, and that causes anxiety. When you're above the comfort zone, you feel something similar, but now it might be excitement, but excitement and energy and excitement and anxiety have a similar signature. So it's very easy to misjudge it as anxiety. When I'm working with the client, one of the things I'll tell them all the time, you will have this brain fog feeling, this cognitive dissonance, and it's neuroplasticity in action, but it's almost like changing the wheels on a car while it's moving. When you go to sleep, the neuroplasticity is able to focus on it on activation. Neuroplasticity happens. You wake up the next day. You start looking at your life like that. When you it more so when you're doing something new, because when you're doing something that you've been doing all along, your habits don't need to change. You're using the same habits. This is more about going for a quest that's new for you. As people go for that new quest, the neuroplasticity has to occur because they're letting go of things that they once thought were true, or they're doing things that they thought were impossible. Now, resistance factors are these things in here, and they get triggered. And then the other thing that's happening, there might be some triggers that you haven't faced in 2 or 3 decades. And you don't know what's going to happen when those things hit. And we've all seen it. People are going along and things are fine. And next thing they get this major problem gets triggered, and they could fall into what looks like trauma because they've protected themselves from it for so long. So we start going into this range, it gets difficult. I'm not talking about mental health. I don't do mental health, but it is something that happens. I'll call it little t. If it's something as simple as your people laughing at you because you dropped your ice cream cone, that could get lodged in as an event, and it could be triggerable. When you think about somebody bumping into you, that thing gets triggered, and because it reminds you of when you dropped your ice cream. The point is, there's a trillions of associations. We have 100 billion neurons. Each neuron is connected with thousands of other neurons. That means trillions of connections. All these associations are there just ready to come up. We used to think it was a mind. We now know it's a network of neurons. And so you know how fast the subconscious is. We're dealing with a network of neurons that can process at 11 million bits per second. And there's the challenge right there. You want to solve things, start looking at that, because anything that's 100 billion, anything that's 100 billion of anything, you want to start making sure that that's on track. Right? And of course, 95% of what we do is by habit. So that's going to come into play. I'll talk about that. Now, my story and the why behind it. Just want to go through this because I think I'm going to go kind of quick, but I think it helps to understand how I got here. So it starts, I grew up in New York City, and sports was a big thing. Stickball, football on the street. We used to play on the street. You know the idea. Stickball was like baseball, but with a skinny stick and a softball that you could play on in urban environments. I was small for my age, and I was always the last guy picked. It was frustrating. And, at first I thought it was just because I was small, but one thing led to another, self-fulfilling prophecy. My skills probably didn't develop as fast as they could because I just thought I was bad, right? I expected to be the last one picked. And then, of course, they wouldn't throw me the ball. And you get the point. So, a parallel thing is that I learned to read by reading a book that my father had about flying. And 5 and 6 years old, I remember wanting to be a fighter pilot. That's just what I wanted to be, a fighter pilot. Then at 8, I was diagnosed with needing glasses, and that like shattered my dreams because you can't be a pilot if you don't have perfect vision. Later, that all of that led to this feeling that I was failing under pressure, that I did not perform under pressure. And you could argue a lot of different things. So I figured, okay, my experience in sports growing up, and now let me solve that. So I went deep into neuroscience. One other thing that happened when I was 5, and I think this is the other part of that three-legged stool, is my sister told us, I was teaching myself to ride a bike. My father was an undercover police, so he was very seldom home. And so I was teaching myself to ride a bike. I was mechanically inclined. He used to take the training wheels off, etc. And my sister told me, yeah, if you say, I know I can, I know I can, I know I can, you'll be able to do it. She heard that from my aunt. She was 2 years older than me. So I just took it as gospel. I said, I know I can, I know I can, I know I can. I took the training wheels off and rode the first time. That got lodged in. As we know, a lot of conditioning happens from 0 to 7. That got locked in as, wow, this thing works. So all my life, I had been trying affirmations. Of course, I didn't know what they were called. I didn't learn that was an affirmation until I was in my 20s. But I would say, I know I can. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. So, and of course, it didn't help with the pressure thing. I was still failing under pressure and didn't know what that was. So I went deep into neuroscience. I went deep into mental toughness in leadership, mental toughness in sports. And through that period, I wandered into a recruiting office. I was 21 at the time and not really knowing what I wanted to do with my life because I couldn't be a pilot and I didn't have any coaching or mentoring to help me get over that. And I wandered into this office. It turns out I scored very high on the entry exam, and he told me what I can do, all this great stuff, blah, blah, blah. Then I had a newfound belief. I went next semester in school. I signed up for 6 courses, college, and got A's on all of them. So I took a mediocre GPA and got straight A's because I had belief. So that's another thing. So you had affirmations, you had the belief, and then you had the study of mental toughness. Now, these were all different moments that led to this lifelong study of what is now neuroscience. It wasn't called neuroscience at the time. So anyway, back to trying to figure out how not to fold under pressure. I said mental toughness. I did do martial arts. I went Army Ranger training, trained with Navy SEALs, and all that helped. But I had a narrow test, very specific test I was using, and it had to do with playing sports and getting near the end of the score, being ahead and being able to close it out and win it. And that's what I wasn't able to do. I was able to play well, but I couldn't close it out. And that was my test. And so like things in the martial arts, tournaments and all that stuff, it didn't show up there. It didn't show up in Army Ranger training. It didn't show up in a lot of things. It didn't show up in bicycle racing, but it kept showing up in particular sports. Now, fast forward, I'll save you the gory details, but I essentially gave up on trying to fix it in my 40s because I just couldn't get there. So I created this strategy of protecting myself from pressure. I still played sports, but I wasn't trying to win the tournament because I didn't believe I could. Golf and tennis, I used to enter these tournaments to put pressure on myself. And I created a strategy for business where I always protected myself. In other words, I always operated from a position of strength, and it worked until it didn't. So in my motorcycle business, there was a series of things that happened leading up to the pandemic, but there were other issues that were starting to happen globally, just different geopolitical stuff that you can look back and now and see that it was causing some pressure. And then the pandemic just, took the lid off. Anyway, I started feeling that pressure thing because I wasn't prepared for that. I didn't protect against that. And now all of a sudden I'm losing everything, my life savings. I hired a coach that I had worked with before, and he couldn't help. We tried things, he couldn't help. And I then took matters into my own hands, and I did a technique that I learned in NLP 40 years, 30 years earlier, but it was for a phobia. And I wanted to figure out when was the first time I discovered this difficulty with pressure. Turns out it wasn't a pressure thing at all, at least not directly. I have an astigmatism, and I never wore my glasses because I didn't like to as a kid. And when I started wearing contacts at the time, they didn't correct for astigmatism. The sports that I used to test were all ball sports. And if you ever looked at somebody's glasses and twist them, if they have an astigmatism, you'll see that the trapezoidal shapes distort. Well, that's basically what I was doing, what my eyes were doing. And as pressure rose, the pressure on your brain and the eye sockets, et cetera, it would increase the astigmatism. That's why at the end of the game, it was always harder for me to perform because I wasn't seeing the ball. And instead of what I know now from research is that when you have an astigmatism, you're better off not looking at the ball, but looking at the entire frame, because then everything moves together and you're more likely able to hit, catch, or whatever. I didn't know that at the time. So all of that time thinking I couldn't perform under pressure had to do with astigmatism. With that knowledge, the day I figured that out, I broke through and never looked back. And all that stuff just fell away. And why do I tell you that story? Because for everyone out there, there's some similar story that you have like that. I gave you 3 examples. The affirmations with the bicycle, but then it didn't work later. Walking into the recruiting office and finding out that I scored very high on the GT, the IQ test, and then and doing that. And then even in finishing the first officer, number 1 officer in the class when I went for my engineer officer training. All of those things, but it still didn't solve this pressure thing I thought I had. And it was a false equivalence. So how many opportunities did I turn my back on because I didn't think I could do it? You see, that's the point here. So we want to break through that. Now, looking back, I know how to do it with neuroplasticity. And that's why I'm telling you that neuroplasticity is bigger than the breakthrough that you thought it was. Now, the first pillar, fundamentals of cognitive performance, and I've already touched on a lot of them, so I don't have to spend a lot of time, but the subconscious is not, these are the fundamentals. You have to sort of understand these and believe them at least to the end of the presentation for it to work. Because if you don't believe that these things are possible, so this is what I do with the client. First thing we do, we've got to get a level set on this. And at some level, they have to believe directionally. And then I can work on it once I get it directional. But if they don't believe that, if they can't even get to the point that it's a network of neurons and not a mind, then it's really not worth it, because it's a fight uphill all the time, because they're letting their network of neurons dictate what they believe and what they think, and that's not useful. So the subconscious is not a mind; it's a network of associations fueled by neurons that form passive least resistance, aka habit patterns, and they're formed because of myelin. And myelin is something that happens through deep practice. We've seen it with athletics, and that's what muscle memory is. It's actually nervous system memory, and it's nerves that are wrapped with myelin. It works the same way with cognitive processing, because your associations that are coming up are the associations that are on the path of least resistance. You can change your identity. You can regulate your emotions in real time, and you can eliminate reactivity. So by changing identity and personality are constructs, and we've tried to change identity. That's what I was doing when I was trying to change my ability to deal with pressure. I was changing it at the construct level when actually it was a set of elements, and the major element was my astigmatism. You change the astigmatism, and the identity changed with respect to pressure. You can regulate your emotions real time. So people who get triggered, the tendency is to try to suppress the emotion. You can't suppress the emotion because, well, it just doesn't work. It, the emotion is there to get your attention on something, and if you suppress it, it just gets louder and bigger because it's acting out of life and death. And the way we modulate it, we don't regulate it. We intercept it, we modulate it, and then we dynamically regulate it before it's formed, because once it's formed, it's an emotion. We do have something later on that we can use emotional modulation, which I'll cover today. But in the first half second, we're modulating those emotions real time, which is why we stop them in their tracks. We don't stop them by suppressing them and making them stop. We stop them because we break the pattern. But because it's happening so fast, 11 million bits per second, we break that pattern by with habits. So it's happening at the same speed. And the last one, you can eliminate reactivity. So reactions kind of go with that emotional thing, but reactivity is you see something and you just react, and you can't stop yourself. People are reacting and they know they shouldn't be reacting, and they're still reacting. So you can actually eliminate reactivity. Those are things I'm telling you that you can do, and I'll give you steps you can take to do it today. To make it a habit, I need 3 to 6 weeks. There's a few different exercises, but you'll make progress on day one. When I talk about 3 to 6 weeks, I'm talking about being able to eliminate the really scary reactive stuff, the stuff that you worry about will send you into a anxiety spiral. You'll make progress, see progress right away, make significant progress in 2 weeks, but it takes about 6 weeks for you to be able to handle all those unknowns that you know can still possibly show up. And then we're mostly cells, 50 trillion of them, and 100 billion are neurons, which drive the majority of your behavior through a network of associations. We're all cells. And so if you're not thinking about physiology when you're talking about performance, you're leaving a lot of money on the table. And this explains why physiology is a major determinant of our outcomes. Yet it's still disregarded in most cognitive conversations. What leadership book do you pick up? And it leads with physiology. Physiology is showing up more and more in books, breathing, hydration, etc. But it's certainly not the lead, and it's number 7 out of 7 in terms of things to do. So this is a big part of it. This is be do have. This is a be do have framework. I make the shift from, instead of going after what you want, you first become the person who's aligned with that particular quest. The mental, physical, spiritual, we control that. 100% we're in control. And by spiritual, I don't mean the spiritual realm. I mean our higher self, our awareness of awareness. That awareness, like when you're scrolling on social media and you said, I'm supposed to go to bed now, and you're still scrolling. Or the one that, when you're reaching for that chocolate cake and you said, I'm not supposed to be eating chocolate cake, and you reach for it anyway. That awareness of awareness, we need to elevate that. That's the spiritual. We're in control of that. That's connected to our heart, the heart brain, if you will, if you think about Heart Math Institute. But mental, physical, spiritual, we're in control. Everyone would agree that relationships, professional and financial, we share control of that. We share the experience. Other people are involved with relationships. Other people are involved with professional. Every buyer needs a seller, etc. Even financial, even if you're a financial trader, there's still buyers and sellers, and there's still information flow. And you're investing in something, and that something at some point is being touched with people. So anyway, we don't control these the way we control these. This is our agency, and we use our agency to show up as the best version of ourselves, so we're more likely to get the things that we want over here. The emotional is also in our control, but I call it the gateway to the right side, because this is the first area that we could easily get hijacked. When you fix this and then you're pursuing your quest, you have buttons, which is why I spent the time talking about the reactivity piece. You have buttons that people can push, whether on purpose or unintentionally, and next thing you know, you're hijacked. The second big area is relationships. And so here we fix this with emotional modulation inside the 600 milliseconds and outside in the stimulus reaction response cycles. This we fix with the performance hygiene, because we have to make sure that there's no relationship wounds that are in place that are likely to trip you up and then throw you off course. And then you're ready to deal with the professional financial. Now, most people want to do more. I'm telling you, there's enough studies showing that when you focus, and now that we know that it's not a mind, it's a network of neurons, when you focus on one thing, you're more likely to achieve much more. I can tell you stories and stories about that. Now, we're still in pillar one, the knowledge, the fundamentals, understanding how beliefs, the role beliefs play and how to change them, discover your limiting beliefs, and then change your limiting beliefs, because your beliefs were given to you for the most part. You didn't decide, I'm going to have this belief. Some of them you may have, but you have a lot of beliefs that were just like you just absorbed from 0 to 7, because at that time you learn just by showing up. You don't have to work for it. Neuroplasticity is the ability to change habits. I've already talked about that some. Then we have priming. Priming is much more powerful than you can ever imagine. And it's not what's more powerful in priming, it's what shows up first. So when they do these different experiments and they first will leave with the question about ethnicity, or then they'll change and leave with the question about gender, whichever one they lead with is the one that takes hold in terms of priming. And I don't want to go into detail, but you can imagine the different kinds of studies that they've used, but it's what comes up first. So even though you have a very important thing like a vision board, if you get primed with something small, but it comes first, then all bets are off. And we've experienced that. Then mindset, most people know the importance of a growth mindset. But I would tell you what's even more important than understanding fixed and growth mindset is being able to get back to a growth mindset instantaneously. And I literally mean instantaneously, in milliseconds, not in minutes and hours, but in milliseconds. And that's why dynamic leadership is about leading based on the first 600 milliseconds, because we're conditioning in the thing, just like dynamic traction control, just like dynamic ABS is modulating in real time depending on the surface changes. Dynamic suspension, the same thing. They talk about 10,000 decisions per second. It's constantly adjusting based on the inputs coming in. That's what dynamic leadership is about. And we use neuroplasticity to build the habits so that it works. So that's the first pillar. You have to have some basic understanding. Second pillar is habit mastery. Again, I've alluded to a lot of this. There's 3 types of habits to address. Behavioral habits, and those will fall away. Let me tell you, when you, and this is not going to happen, well, for most people, probably won't happen instantaneously. But once you get a handle on what we're talking about today and you're starting to activate it, you will find that your behavioral habits fall away with just a decision. You don't need 21 days. You don't need deep practice. I'm talking behavioral habits. Whether you bite your nails, or you say or you keep eating chocolate candy when you say you're not, these behavioral habits can fall away with just a decision. And I'm not exaggerating. Maybe not on day one, maybe not after this workshop, but once you get a handle on how this works and you've integrated it into your system, because now you're in command of your neuroplasticity. The subconscious is no longer running the show. Your higher self is running the show. Your conscious mind is implementing the show, and the network of neurons is just there to help you out, pretty much like artificial intelligence. So those are behavioral habits. We don't really have to spend time on behavioral habits. What we have to do is spend time on agency. You have to have agency in personal leadership, and that's what makes them fall away right away. If you are here watching this and you don't mind, if you don't mind just joining into the group, because it helps TikTok recognize that there's activity here. I've gotten messages. I just started going live Saturday. I've only gone live a few times on TikTok, but it turns out that if there's not activity, then I get this message and I have to put a puzzle together and just try to avoid that, because apparently they're monitoring what kind of activity is going on. So anyway, so there's the next set of habits is reactive habits. Also put comments in the chat. I've got the chat right there. And if I see comments come up, I will stop and answer those. And the same thing, if you're not on TikTok, but you're on one of the platforms, the same thing, I will see your comments come in and we'll respond. Reactive habits are the next ones. These are the more difficult one, more difficult than behavioral. And it takes more than just a decision, because you're reacting to external things, but at the extreme, you're reacting to your internal. So there's one thing to react to an external. you get an email that's really, really bad news. And the first thing you know, your heart sinks, you feel that sensation in your gut, and it's, oh man. That was a reaction to an external stimulus. The next thing that happens is your choice. You can turn your head and reset, or whatever you want to do. You can look up, you can write, make a note, something to reset, or you can do what has become habitual for a lot of people, and that is react to your reaction. So now you have this sensation, it feels dread, and now you're reacting to, oh boy, here's the dread, here we go again. We're going to have an anxiety spiral. Now what are we going to do? Oh man, I'm having a bad day. I was having such a good day, and now the day is bad. Oh, my whole week is going to be bad. And oh, what am I going to? And next thing you know, you're reacting to reacting to reacting to reacting. That speed of that first system is logical for a hunter gatherer, because that stimulus is not an email, it's a tiger. And you don't have time to sit and pause and contemplate when you're fighting a tiger. You've got, your life is measured in quarters of a second at a time, which is why we have that hyper speed when you see somebody getting triggered. So we've got to fix the reactive habits, and we don't fix them by suppressing them. We don't fix them by being strong and hard. We fix them by conditioning in interception and checks and balances. And the short version would be this: making the assumption, and I'm making an assumption here, but working with a client, we would actually figure out what is actually going on. But making the assumption that the nervous system is treating it like a tiger. We know it's not a tiger. So we have the nervous system, while it's starting out in the first 600 milliseconds, ask the questions of itself to determine, is this really a threat? And most things are not real threats. I mean, if I ask you, what's the second worst thing that happened to you 5 years ago? Most people can't come up with it, because there's not a lot of life and death threats. And that's how we remove the reactive habits, not by suppressing them or doing something with strength and all that. We fix them by correcting them real time. The same way anti-lock brakes modulate the brakes for you, and you don't even notice it. That's how dynamic leadership does with reactivity. As soon as that reaction starts, before it has meaning, before you've thought about it, before it's consciously aware, before you've added all the so what and this and that to it, you're correcting it because it's not a real threat. And if you don't catch it early and it gets into conscious awareness, now the challenge is you're perceiving that as part of your identity. It's meaning, just like I was doing with the kid. That pressure thing became an identity, but it's meaning. It's now a narrative that you have to defend. And we've all been there. People are arguing with us, and our argument is completely irrational because they're defending something only because they've accepted it, and now they have to keep defending it, even though you've shot down every argument that they have. They know it's false. Everybody around them knows it's false, but they can't live into that because it's their identity. I'll get into a little bit more when we get into the first 600 milliseconds as how that applies as well. And then the next one is identity habits. And identity is the hardest one. But when you understand how to do this, the reactive habits and the identity habits become just part of the process. Identity and personality are the big picture. These are the big constructs. Think about all the reactivity, all the behavioral habits, all the beliefs, values, and attitudes that go into identity. This is why you can't change it at the construct level. It's a result, a compilation of all this stuff going on. But when you start looking at what's the big drivers of the identity, we can change those. For me, that feeling that I couldn't perform under pressure was simply coming from an astigmatism. You change that one element and it changed everything. And the fact that I had done all that study about mental toughness and the inner game of tennis and inner game of golf and all that, I was able to pull all this together, which is when neuroplasticity came about. It just made so much sense because I'd already been through that, trained with martial arts masters, ranger school. All of that became my litmus test for, does this really work, or is it just noise? And then identity habits, creating the habit of accessing the best version of yourself no matter what. That's what we're doing. And when you can do that question, what would I do if I knew I couldn't fail? Your answer would be, I'm actually doing it, because you don't have that fear anymore and you lean into doing it. You may not lean into doing it overnight because you have to build an on-ramp. And that's, I first talked about you have to have an exit from your life the way it was, and then you have to build an on ramp to get to the life the way you want it to be, and then you get to that highway. So the same way when you're doing a highway interchange, if you're going east and you need to go north, you don't make a 90-degree turn if you're on the freeway. You exit first, you slow down, and then you're in the interchange, and then you're picking your speed back up. You get on the highway. That's the exit, the on ramp, and then you're on the main thoroughfare. This is that first 600 milliseconds. I won't spend a lot of time on here, uh, but this is the reason I call it 600 milliseconds. It's a half second reaction time for the conscious mind. And I do have to put the caveat here from a neuroscience standpoint, it's not this clean and tidy. It's very loopy. It's feedback loops constantly going through here. Remember, 11 million bits per second. So there's a lot of processing going on, but this is the way to understand it because there is initial detection. And by the way, the reason it's 600 milliseconds and not 500 milliseconds when I talk about it being a half second is because there's about 100 milliseconds of pre-listening. So you got pre-listening, and you have initial detection, and then you have rapid appraisal and reaction formation. Each one of these 2/10 of a second, there's different strategies that apply. So I have a couple of dozen models, frameworks, and architectures that are designed to intervene with these to establish the neuroplasticity. Everybody doesn't need all 26. We only need 2 or 3 that work for that person. But the reason I have 26 is because anytime I run into a person who's having a lot of trouble, then I create a model or framework because I want to be able to teach it to other coaches. The reason why we use models and frameworks is because the conscious mind side processes words, the network of neurons side processes signals. So it's hard to explain it and teach it, but I can use frameworks. So in the beginning, we have readiness, and I put an example, of perpetual question. Everyone has a perpetual question. Some of us, our perpetual question acts like a resistance factor. Am I safe? Am I going to be okay? Well, I wonder what bad thing's going to happen today. So far, day's going pretty good so far. I wonder what's going to happen next. It can't continue. It's too good to be true. Whatever. And other people have a more empowering perpetual question. How can I take advantage of this? What's coming my way today? Where's the opportunity in the stuff that happens to me today? Whatever it is, right? So we can change our perpetual question. That's preemptive priming. Then we have initial detection. And this is where the positivity, it's the positivity exercise. But what it is, it's the interception, dynamic interception. Because of this, the network of neurons, aka subconscious, perceives the majority of stimuli as threats, as a threat. So we have to reset that because we know there's not thousands of tigers running around in our environment. So we don't really need to be thinking about tigers. And it's almost like we condition in, it's not a tiger, so therefore you don't need to stress out. But I do it differently. And that takes about 6 weeks, 2 weeks to see it make a difference, 4 weeks to be applicable. And then by 6 weeks, you don't get triggered anymore. And you still have the ability, if it really is a tiger, you'll do the right thing. Then we have rapid appraisal. And in between these two is where your cognitive biases kick in. And when I first started going down this path of wanting to resolve some of this, I was looking at cognitive biases, and I came up with 36 of them that impact that get in the way of our success. And I initially thought that I was going to have answers for the different cognitive biases. Turns out you just have it's a signal, and that signal has a signature, and when that signature hits, we just discount it, but we condition it in. This is not conscious awareness. It's not information. You're not going to get this by me telling you. It's actually doing the practice so that that signal no longer means so much because it's just a cognitive bias. It's like confirmation bias. That confirmation bias gets people to do things that they shouldn't be doing, and you don't want that to happen. So the signal gets discounted. And this is where I talk about dynamic modulation. We're literally modulating as we go. And then here, reaction formation, we're getting towards the end of that half second where it's going to be handed off to the conscious mind as a response, as a recommended response. And here we can fire a pre-trained anchor. We can anchor in where you take a deep breath. You can anchor in a blissful state, like if you meditate, you can anchor that state that you're meditating. You can anchor that state. And so when you get triggered, if it gets past if it gets past the interception, it gets past the modulation, you still have an opportunity to catch it here by conditioning in that state. So when you feel that sensation, you also trigger that calm state that you have when you're meditating. The third pillar, so that was the second pillar, habit mastery. And the purpose of that is to make it clear that we can change habits, behavioral, reactive, identity. Just by separating them and recognizing what you're working on, you'll start making progress. But you can apply neuroplasticity in each step. And then the third pillar, state mastery. This is the big one because state mastery is how you avoid getting triggered. It's not that you stop triggering, it's just the triggers don't bother you anymore because your system recognizes that it's not a tiger. And the other thing with state mastery is it's proven that heart rate variability is correlated with willpower. So the more heart rate variability you have, the more willpower you're going to have. And if you think about it, how willpower wanes throughout the day, discipline wanes throughout the day, and you think about decision fatigue, the more heart rate variability you have, the more willpower you're going to have throughout the day. Willpower still wanes, it's still a limit. And that's why we do things with neuroplasticity in the first half a second and not worry about willpower, or reserve willpower for those things where we need it. But the point is, if you want to have a dashboard for your state, look at coherence and heart rate variability. And heart rate variability is not the rate of your heartbeat, it's the space between the heartbeats. So the more variability you have between the beats. So if you have a heart rate of 60 beats per minute, that's roughly every second. But if we were measuring it, it's not going to be a second between every beat. You're going to have 0.8 of a second, and then you're going to have 1.2 seconds, and 1.6, 1.4 seconds, and maybe 0.6 seconds. And it's going to be back and forth because as we're breathing in, it's one rate, and then as we breathe out, it's another rate. But if you're stressed and you're triggered and you're just like freaking out, you're not going to have variability because your heart's beating as fast as it can beat, and every single space is the same. And that's low heart rate variability, and there's a correlation with that in low coherence. Low coherence means more rigidity and chaos. More rigidity and chaos means fixed mindset and scattered thinking. And that's why coherence and heart rate variability is important as a dashboard item for your state. Now, cell behavior is like human behavior. There's two configurations for cells: protection from toxicity and pursuing nutrients and growth. And cells only have one or the other. They don't do both. Either they're pursuing nutrients and growth or they're protecting from toxicity. You can start to see parallels when you look at the research from the Heart Math Institute. They showed how when you're constantly holding things in, when you're resenting, when you are dealing, you can say it another way, in fight or flight, long periods in fight or flight, you can see why there's health problems that come from that. I'm not practicing medicine here, I'm not practicing mental health, but it doesn't take a rocket science to see that things are fractal. Humans are like the cells. And if you keep your cells in protective mode and they're not getting nutrients and growth, there's 50 trillion cells. What's going to happen if they're being malnourished? Life is fractal. So what's true for the cell is true for yourself. And coaches know that people don't create greatness out of fear. When they're in fear mode, they don't create greatness. People may be inspired more when they're in fear, but long term, it's not a strategy. You cannot perform at your best when you're stressed, and hence why I started with the pressure curve, because the pressure curve, in my view, is context for why we want to apply neuroplasticity. Now, that was oh, you know what? Let me just jump back to here because I didn't do this. I wanted to cover this. The 4 layers of reactivity. Internal threat, that's something that's not real. And I call this the hater behavior. You know, if you're an influencer or a social media creator, you know that you can post something and people come out of the woodwork attacking your character. I call that the hater reflex. Your post triggered something inside of them. It's nothing that you did, has nothing to do with you other than you posted it. Triggered some insecurity inside of them, and it hits the fight or flight reaction, and bam. So that's a nothing burger, but it's an internal reaction to their own insecurity. So you ignore those. The second level is the cognitive biases. I already talked about those. That's a reactivity thing. That's why confirmation bias works. That's why authority works. That's why scarcity works. So social proof. I'm not saying that those are always bad, but we have to be aware. Am I doing this out of a conscious decision? Is it aligned with my values, beliefs, attitude, quest? Or am I doing it just because I'm being hijacked by some advertiser or marketer who understands how to push my buttons? And then you have the layer, the ego threat. So this is when somebody's threatened. Road rage. This is where road rage is happening. A person cuts somebody off and they give them the finger, and next thing you know, that's an ego threat, and it turns into World War III right there on the Atlanta Expressway. You know, if you're from Atlanta, you know why I used Atlanta. Uh, and then we have the phobia lockout. Now, we don't really see phobia problems in business, but when people crash out, that's essentially what's going on. There's so much fear and they're reacting to internal reactions, and it's happening so fast, there's no conscious engagement. So those are the four layers of reactivity, and we'll stop all of them. If it's a phobic thing, there's a process that we use. We have to do some rewriting. The others can be reframed, but you don't change these in the moment. They don't really change well in the moment because they're already in fight or flight. You already have the cortisol and adrenaline flowing. And by the way, neuroplasticity doesn't work well when you're in fight or flight. You have to have that high coherence and high heart rate variability for the neuroplasticity. And then we have the 5 levels of leadership. So this was personal leadership. So this was the third pillar that we're getting to. Let me just connect the dots for you. So I went from here talking about the cells and in third pillar, and then the by managing, again, it's a dashboard item. So this would be one of those frameworks that I use just to make sense of it. We don't need to spend time in collapse. This is the crashing out. This is catastrophizing, the phobic lockout. We don't need to spend time and destabilize. This is the road rage about to happen. This is the road rage happening. This is the road rage about to happen when the person's beating on their steering wheel. We don't need these states. They don't do any good for you unless you're fighting with a tiger. And stabilize is where it's okay to pursue, but my objective for clients is to live here, to live in agency. It's not realistic to live in expansion. Expansion is like when athletes step their level up for a game. Like you'll watch a basketball game, and for 3 periods, they're back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then in the 4th period, they really step the game up. Watching American football, it's like how the plays go the whole time. And it's like that last 2 minutes seems like it could take 15 minutes because they've stepped up their game. They're doing everything. You know, it's the inches. They're working on every single thing. So expansion doesn't work long term. You have to recover from it. But we can live agency 24/7. And if you're agency 24/7, you will have access to the expansion, and you're less likely to fall into stabilize. So that's the 5 levels. And again, it's more of a dashboard thing. And it's, as a coach, I'm looking at this when I'm talking to a client. I'm looking at where they are. If they drop into destabilize, I change the subject. Because once the cortisol's flowing, I'm not going to have any progress. And obviously, we don't want anybody crashing out. If that happens, we need to, make sure that they should be contacting somebody about mental health. But not. The point is, it's a question. I'm not going to push somebody past destabilize. Just change the subject because I recognize it's a network of neurons thing. It's not a mental thing. It's they're letting some association come in, and then the next time we meet, I will ease into that to uncover information about that association. But I already know it's a charged item, a topic. So I go in there gingerly and I come in through the back door to sort of help them talk about it without getting triggered. I also do some dissociation stuff. I talk about them going outside the room and looking in the room and answering questions, whatever. So back to, seems like we missed a slide. No, we'll do here. So I'm going to change these slides around. All right, so I have a 7-step reset. Step 1, step 2 is the coherence. We talked about having the fundamentals. Fundamentals have to be in place. We keep running laps around these. We'll get better and better and better. Then we have step 2, high coherence, high heart rate variability, because we want low chaos and low rigidity. And then step 7 is at the end of the 7 steps. So one of the things I didn't say is that this stimulus reaction response cycle happens roughly 30,000 times a day. not the same for everybody. For some people, it might be 10,000 times a day. For others, it might be 50,000 times a day. If a person's really triggered and hyper all the time and always scared and fight or flight, they're going to have faster stimulus reaction response cycles. If you look at a monk, they're going to have a few stimulus reaction response cycles. But on average, the person's having 30,000 of these a day. And so 1 and 2 is happening constantly. We want to make sure 7 gets us back to mindfulness so that we're ready for 1. This will make sense on this slide. So here's what we're talking about. Step 1, fundamental. Step 2 is your high coherence and high rate heart rate variability. Think about this as the dashboard. So I always want to get back to this nice allostatic kind of level before my stimulus response thing kicks in. That step 3 is stimulus reaction response, I should say. Response is step 4 because this is the full conscious mind. There is some response here, but it's more about the handoff to the conscious mind. This is the real conscious mind decision making that happens. And then we have step 5 is emotional modulation. And emotional modulation is you have 1 to 90 seconds. It happens over a period of 1 to 90 seconds because emotion, as you've heard, is emotion, energy in motion. And we need to get that modulated before it becomes a neurobiological event. If we don't get the emotion modulated, it turns into a feeling, which is a neurobiological or chemical. And then it's also accessible as an association. And so we have to do 2 things. One, we have to unpack a lot of those past emotional hurts. So we process them using emotional modulation. And that's on the some of the exit stuff, right? That's removing resistance factors. But then for new emotional charges that come in, we modulate them in that 90-second period. And then we have the action, which is do it, delay it, delegate it, discard it. You take some action. And the reason I have it there is because if you're doing this 30,000 times a day, then we need to get ready. And you're not going to always have 10 minutes to do the action. Sometimes you're going to delay it. You're going to make a note and do it later. You might say, I'm going to go to artificial intelligence, or I'm going to delegate it. And then step 7 is back to mindfulness. So allostatic neuroplasticity, the same way athletes drill until the right move is automatic under pressure. That's what we're going to do for cognitive processing. Leaders and professionals can rewire the first half second of a stimulus reaction response cycle. When pressure hits, you want your best response to fire first. That's why we get high HRV, high coherence, so that in this first 600 milliseconds, the best responses are the ones that are firing. We don't really need to add new skills at this point. We're just adding stability. When I install more stability, you will automatically begin showing up as the best version of yourself more frequently. Homeostatic coaching gets you back to normal. Allostatic coaching creates a new trajectory. And by the way, homeostatic is why the homeostasis is why hacks don't work. I also think it's why supplements don't work, but that's not my field. But because you have 100 billion neurons, trillions of connections, and they're all wanting to get back to status quo. And so when you introduce a hack is foreign. It works for a few days, but then it stops working because it's gotten absorbed by those 100 billion neurons. That's why we do it at the source with neuroplasticity. So here's your 7-step reset. Step 1, beliefs, neuroplasticity, priming, mindset, physiology, understanding how those work towards allostatic capability, understanding your role in managing them, and each one can impact the other. That's a big fact that I didn't mention. Each of these impacts the other one, and you got to keep doing it. Just keep going around in a circle, around in a circle, around in a circle, and eventually you get the allostatic capability. Then we have the step 2 is your coherence and HRV, that dashboard. There's your step 3, and this is what I've been saying. I'm going to say this here because there's not another good place to mention it. When you think about the difference from homeostasis to allostasis, I already gave the example of a weightlifter hitting a plateau. But one of the best examples I've come across outside of martial arts is, and by the way, martial arts, Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, they even use this in dance and yoga. It's applying. You're seeing allostatic capacity improving in those disciplines as well. But the one that shows up best and it's like irrefutable is the through hiker. That person is hiking from border to border, like from Mexico to Canada or Canada to Mexico, 3,000-mile hikes. And they're doing these over a 90-day period. They start off the hike, they're doing like 6, 7, 8 miles a day, and they're working at it. You can tell they're concentrating, they're focused. It's not like they're lollygagging. They're putting in the work to do this 8 miles a day. And then it just starts creeping up a little bit. By the time they finish the hike, a lot of these hikers are doing 30 miles a day and for like 10 days in a row. Think about that. That's more than a marathon every day for 10 days in a row. And that is not uncommon for that to happen. The people who make it that way, that far, they've allowed the increases to come naturally. And that's that allostatic capability that we're talking about. The central nervous system in the brain is always trying to predict how much demand is coming. And when it underpredicts, when it's wrong on the low side, it adds more neurotransmitter. Neurotransmitter, as I said, amplifies your signal because the dopamine makes you feel good, which enables you to push a little harder. But you're also building neurotransmitter in the glutamate and the acetylcholine, which is better for the physical action, but it also works the same way with cognitive processing. But that through hiker is a good visual. And if you read Great by Choice by Jim Collins, the 20-mile march, same thing. Every day you do 20 miles. Whether it's good or bad weather, you do 20 miles. You always do your 20 miles. You don't do more miles when the days are good. You don't do fewer miles when there's a snowstorm. They were talking about a Antarctica expedition. Now, the fourth pillar, the performance hygiene, and I put these in order so they get progressively harder, but the remove resistance factors and add empowerment catalysts. And the reason why I do the performance hygiene is because there are people who can teach this stuff. They know it all, but they may not do it with neuroplasticity. They're doing it with mindset and manifestation, and by the way, I do some segments that I explain that all of that mindset, manifestation, vibration, energetics, all that stuff can be explained with neuroplasticity. I'm not knocking it, but I'm just telling them neuroplasticity is the source. Those other things are directly going after it. But people can teach this stuff. And then I watch them crash out because somebody hurt their feelings. And when you dig into it, it's, yeah, this person may have hurt their feelings, but it triggered an old wound. It triggered some pain from before. And so if you start with nutrition, you have to have good nutrition. It limits oxidative waste. Now, you know that no matter what you eat, your body's going to get what it needs out of it. But what they don't tell you is that the cleaner you're eating, the less oxidative waste you have. The less oxidative waste, the less toxicity and inflammation. The less toxicity and inflammation, the less likely you're going to have other problems because your cells are not protecting themselves from toxicity. So we want to eat clean so we don't have the oxidative waste. And if you are getting more oxidative waste, you need to do more movement so you're getting a lymphatic fluid movement because the lymphatic fluid doesn't have a pump. It needs you to move, and you have to move your upper body and your lower body. I think that's why martial arts, they always did jumping jacks. It's got to be one of the best exercises. Military too, one of the best exercises for lymphatic fluid. Hydration, same thing. If you get dehydrated, your body starts going into fight or flight. Once you're in fight or flight, you have low coherence and you're getting closer and closer to that problem area. And then specific exercise, all out intervals. We're talking 7 to 15 seconds. This is like sprinting. This is not something you're going to do every day because you have to recover. You'll get yourself hurt and you need to build up to it. I would not go out all out because the reason why all out works is because it's making every single muscle in your body go at the extreme. So if you think about a person who's sprinting, it's so easy to get hurt sprinting. But so you build up to it. You start slow and you make sure you're warm. And every week you get a little faster until you're all out. It takes about 6 or 8 weeks, and then you can go pretty hard. But you can go a whole season and still be adding speed. But you use the stopwatch, and that keeps you, pushing harder. The all out intervals, and it could be done with rowing. It could be done with Stairmaster. It could be done with. But I like sprinting because you're moving your whole body. That's the upper and the lower body. You could probably do it with jumping jacks, I guess, but I don't know if you can really get your heart rate up. And this is not HIIT. It's a portion of a subset of high intensity interval training, but I'm saying 7 to 15 seconds. There's a lot of HIIT that goes longer than that. You can do it on a heavy bag, 7 to 15 seconds, like all out. I like sprinting. I like footwork drills. I like footwork drills uphill. And footwork drills uphill give you almost the same benefit as sprinting, but without the difficulty of recovery. I can do footwork drills every second or third day and not need the recovery because you're not hurting yourself like you are, it's potentially hurting yourself. And the benefits of this is endless. I've got a list of 30 things, but mitochondria, which are like this, the organs of cells, testosterone for men, estrogen for women after menopause, AMPK, which is your metabolic factors, the BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor, anti-inflammation. It gets rid of oxidative waste. There's so many benefits to sprinting and all-out exercise. It becomes a major empowerment catalyst. Forgiveness, that's closing those doors to these random hijacks. That's what I was referring to. People have it together, but then somebody says a word to them and they're crashing out because it's not because that person said the word, it's because that word triggered something from much earlier in their life, and that's the challenge that they're having. And then we have the 7 factors of allostatic increase. So I've talked about allostasis. I've talked about a good example with the through hiker. There's 7 factors that contribute to allostatic production, allostatic capability: novelty, precision, balance or complexity, progression, intensity or explosiveness. So the reason we have balance and explosiveness is because if it's athletics, you're thinking balance, or explosiveness. If it's cognitive, you're thinking complexity and intensity. And then we have struggle at the edge of ability. So when you are using all 7 of those, you're building in more allostatic capability. And you can do it with 6. But once you drop down to 5, and this is not exact science, it's more art, but the point is, if you don't have enough of them, you're really not getting the body generating more neurotransmitter. The reason why the central nervous system and the brain generate more neurotransmitter when you have these 7 in play is because it's being communicated to that this is very important. That's what I was doing at the beginning. For anybody who's here at the beginning, I was scrolling through infographics and then just stopping it randomly and talking about dynamic leadership and or neuroplasticity with respect to the infographics. And they're all mostly emotional intelligence and leadership, because dynamic leadership, that's my deal. Dynamic leadership is something I created that picks up where emotional intelligence left off. And that's why I do that into infographics, but it's communicating to my system that it's important. It's getting me used to answering on the fly. It's getting me used to answering under pressure. It's like a constant hot seat. So I do that before my live events just to warm up, and also while we're letting people join in. And the 7-step reset. So this is where it all comes together. 7-step reset is this: the step 1 through 7, and we do this 30,000 times a day. The objective: drive real-time interception, modulation, and recovery in that first half second. You don't have to learn the models, right? We only use the models that are needed, and then we work together to find solutions. I did talk about the above the line. I gave that example about the comfort zone. What I didn't say is after you get through that barrier, there's a new problem, because you're in the field of infinite possibility and people get freaked out by the unfamiliar. So what we need is a plan, and that's why we focus on principles. So you run with your strengths, stay consistent, keep it simple, but you use principles instead of habits to keep you on the right path. So the VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, doesn't impact you, because opportunities can be seen as threats too. Anything unfamiliar can be seen as a threat. And that is it. I'm going to do this one more time tomorrow as a pilot, and then I'll be gone for a couple of weeks. I'll work through how I'm going to move forward. The other thing I'll do, if there's interest in it, I will do a series on going live, because going live actually enables me to talk about neuroplasticity in action, because you'll go from, I can take a person from being afraid to get on camera to being effective on camera in 6 weeks. No cap. And let me know in the comments if that's interesting to you, or just hit me on the profile with the direct message. All right, we will see you tomorrow at 6 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. We're doing this again. I'll have a few different slides and change the order as I see I need to fix that. Talk soon.